Hey, what's going on, Common Good family? Thanks so much for tuning in to another Love Your Neighbor Sunday community partner conversation where we are really wanting to be intentional about using this space on Love Your Neighbor Sunday, both to go out and to find ways to love and serve our neighbors just in very real and practical ways. And at the same time, to use this space and time to really be intentional about highlighting the work and stories of different community organizations, community leaders, who are on the ground, on the front line, so to speak, loving and serving their communities in very real and tangible ways on a ongoing and regular basis. And so today I'm just super thrilled, excited for our conversation with International Community Health Services Foundation Executive Director, Heidi Wong. Hey, Heidi, first and foremost, again, just thank you so much for taking time out of your day to have this conversation. I know you're just incredibly busy. And so we are grateful just to be able to share space together and grateful that you're willing to share with our community. I was thinking about this conversation, and I think on a very personal note, it feels special for a number of reasons. But for one, we've had the privilege of knowing each other for a long time. I'm trying to think, back in college days, maybe even. And by the way, can I just say this? It's just been such an inspiration to kind of witness your journey and just the ways that you have been grown into the community leader that you are, and certainly been someone that has really championed the cause of, in particular, the AAPI community and causes of justice and equity. So, I think it was really special when we got to reconnect last year. I think in many ways, kind of serendipitously, we were doing that collaboration with Caitlin, Siren in the International District for AAPI Heritage Month. And by the way, shout out to Siren for making that connection. I'm rocking my shirt right now, representing. But they had selected ICHS as the beneficiary for that collaboration that we did. I had no idea that you had actually transitioned and you are now overseeing the foundation side of things. And so, one, it was just great to be able to partner together last year, certainly during AAPI Heritage Month, and then in light of kind of everything that was happening within the Asian American Pacific Islander community. I think we're in the height of, everything that was happening with kind of the anti-Asian hate and violence as well. And so being able to have this conversation a year later and to introduce you more formally to our church and our congregation really is a privilege. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. It's such a privilege to be able to reconnect and share. And yes, when I found out, Royce Church is leading this project last year, I was like, yes, let's connect, let's do something.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was really excited. So thank you. And thank you for inviting me back.
Awesome. Absolutely. Well, hey, I'd love to just jump right in. Maybe we could start the conversation. If you can just take a moment to introduce yourself. Who is Heidi Wong? Maybe even tell us a little bit about, and we're going to kind of unpack more about what ICHS does, but a little bit about your role as executive director for the foundation.
Sure. My name is Heidi Wong. I am a 1.5 generation Chinese American. The reason I say that is because I was born in Seattle, but left the country with my family when I was 2 and returned from Hong Kong when I was 11. So I grew up overseas and came back in my teenage years and had to kind of relearn what it means to be American and to be an immigrant, to have a passport and birth certificate that, of U.S. citizenship, but have no idea what it means. So I had to relearn that. And that, in fact, had a big impact on my career choice later down in my life. So, but anyway, that's a little bit of my background. I am a mother of 3 girls, and let's see what else. And currently, I am the foundation executive director at ICHS.
Awesome, love it. Well, let's talk about ICHS for a little bit. Maybe for those listening in, watching this, who aren't quite familiar with your organization, Yeah, give us kind of the brief. I know that sometimes that's hard to do. The brief, high-level overview of what your organization does, who you serve. Yeah, if you can kind of share a little bit about that, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. So International Community Health Services, or ICHS, is a federally qualified health center. What that means is we get funded by the government to take care of people, regardless of their status, their background, their insurance, their ability to pay. Anyone who comes to our doors will receive culturally relevant and accessible healthcare for whatever they need. And so that means everybody, regardless of your ethnic background. And just a little bit about the ICH Foundation, though. So 15 years ago, we formed the foundation as a separate 501c3, which allows us to have a little bit more flexibility of what we can do, who can sit on a board. As a federally qualified health center, there are certain regulations that prevent us for doing certain things. So a lot of health centers do have a separate foundation whose role is to raise philanthropic dollars to support the work that the clinic does. When we serve people who may not have insurance or underinsured, we do have a sliding fee scale so that they pay what they can. And so the cost, but the cost is the same to serve them. And so that's when philanthropy comes in to cover the cost so that everyone gets the healthcare services that they need.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Talk a little bit, you talked about kind of how the foundation started. I think that even just the history of ICHS as a whole, the organization, I think is quite fascinating, especially maybe for those of us who have grown up kind of in the Seattle region. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the history of ICHS, how it started, kind of what was its intent and purposes back then? And then perhaps, what are the ways in which it's continuing to fulfill that vision today? And then maybe even some of the ways in which that has kind of shifted or changed throughout the years.
Yeah, sure. So almost 50 years ago, so 1973 was when a group of volunteers and community members saw that there was a need in the International District where Chinese and Filipino men were not getting the healthcare that they need to thrive due to language or cultural barriers. They're not accessing mainstream healthcare. And so they got together and started a completely volunteer-run storefront clinic here in the ID for the purpose of serving these people free of charge.
Wow.
So that sort of what started the concept of a community clinic. In the early days, we were part of a consortium to really develop this program, this model. And then in the mid-90s, that's when we officially became a federally qualified health center, getting funding from federal government to really expand this model and serve anyone who qualifies for services. Currently, annually, we serve about 28,000 to 30,000 patients. Pre-COVID, 30,000, and COVID has affected our ability to serve, that number. But we are trying to bring people back into our clinics. Right now, our patient population represent over 70 languages, and we have 4 main clinics in International District: Holly Park, Shoreline, and Bellevue. But in addition to those full service clinics, we are also in schools. So we partner with Seattle World School, we partner with Highland Middle School in Bellevue to be on site, to have a school-based health clinic right there on site so that students have a direct access to services that they need. A lot of these students may have barriers to accessing care, and so being on site is very important to them. We also have a mobile dental clinic that actually goes to various places to provide dental services to our communities. And recently, we started a new program to really serve our elders beyond just primary care. a lot of our patient population, over 20% of our patient population are over 65, which is a pretty high, proportionally much higher than other health centers. So we're seeing a lot more of them. And so leadership, did some assessment and community needs studies to think about how can we better serve this population. And so as a result, now we have a full program called Healthy Aging and Wellness. In it, we have assisted living facility for elders who live on site. We have congregate meal programs where people living in the community, a lot of them are in International District, would come to our site to actually get a nutritious home cooked warm meal.
Gotcha.
We also have adult day services where, again, elders from the community can actually get transportation to come in during the day and spend the day there and not be isolated at home. And one of the most exciting projects that we're in now is we're raising $25 million to build a brand new senior center and clinic here on Beacon Hill to really expand our capacity to serve. We would be able to serve 400 more elders in this space. So we're really excited about that.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. Well, as you're talking about kind of just the ways in which your organization has navigated just the different kind of challenges and needs within the community. I love that, right? Being able to like identify what the needs are, and then even as an organization to kind of prioritize how you're investing kind of those resources and funds. And that's awesome. It's really cool too. You're talking about serving the elderly, and today, right, as we're having this conversation, we've got folks that are volunteering from our church over at ICHS, the Legacy House, which I didn't realize. So that was not your Legacy House was a separate kind of entity and organization, and then recently kind of came up underneath the ICHS.
It used to be managed by the Seattle Chinatown-International District Preservation PDA Development Authority. Okay. They're essentially a developer that build buildings, manage buildings, and so they're really wanting a provider organization to take over their senior services component.
Gotcha.
And at that time, we had already been thinking about this healthy aging and wellness program, and so we felt that it was an opportune time for us to take over as we are building out more programs for our elders.
Yeah. Wow. It made me think about just this question of, I'd imagine you talked about during the pandemic, how that's obviously changed the amount of people that you could kind of serve and help. But then at the same time, I'd imagine there were other kind of needs that arose out of the pandemic. Can you just share a little bit about, and again, you're serving such a diverse population, like 70 different languages. I guess one, how do you do it? But then two, like, what has the past couple of years kind of looked like for you, for the organization? Like, how have you kind of navigated that? And what were some of the unique kind of needs and challenges that kind of came out or surfaced really during this time? And, how are you all kind of working on kind of meeting and addressing those needs in real time?
It's interesting because we're still in the pandemic, but we're thinking about it as if, because
it's done. Exactly.
We're still in it. Interestingly, as we all know, the first COVID case happened at a nursing home here in Washington. Mm-hmm. But after the fact, we think ICHS actually received the very first patient with COVID because one of our physicians noticed the symptoms, but because that person didn't travel specifically from Wuhan, they weren't eligible for testing, so we weren't able to confirm. But in retrospect, we think we probably saw and treated the very first case of COVID positive here. So right from the beginning, we as a healthcare provider and we are super high alert. How can we make sure, one, our staff is safe, two, our patients get the care that they need. and as well as, how can we be on the forefront of COVID testing and keeping people safe, and preventing catching COVID. So, that was top of mind. At the same time, we were in this lockdown. And so we, for example, dental, we had to completely shut down because we couldn't bring people in. So we really had to come together and think about, what do we do? How do we keep, taking care of our people without putting them at risk? We used to not have any telehealth before COVID, and we actually, mobilize all resources to now, telehealth is one core component of our model. During that time, there was already, even before the rise in everything, the International District was already boarded up. There was a lot of just fear about coming to the ID. And so we felt it right from the beginning. It was sort of a ghost town. People weren't really coming in. So, just even though it wasn't directly healthcare, it directly impacted on how we serve our community, right? And so we joined forces with other API organizations, API serving and led organizations to, one, figure out how do we serve our community members, elders in Chinatown, right? They're locked down, they're afraid to come out, but can we bring services to them? Can we bring meals to them? Can we send healthcare workers to them? Can we do calls? And telehealth, there was some challenges with accessing, and knowing how to use devices, but what else can we do? So there's that, but also what can we do to show solidarity with other API organizations, in terms of anti-Asian sentiments. And so, there was a lot of coalition building, joining forces, as well as some advocacy during the time when tests were available or vaccines were available. They were going to all the mass sites, all the mainstream of the larger health systems. They were not coming to community health centers who have a large population of immigrant, refugees, people of color, low income, right? And so our leadership, especially our CEO, had to really advocate, call everybody, and go all the way to, federal and go on media, CNN, to really share the difficulty in health centers like us to get the resources that we need. And as a result, ICHS was actually one of 25 health centers to be able to order vaccines directly from the federal government as a result of our advocacy work.
Wow.
So that is just one example of how, ICHS was and is a healthcare provider, but also we are in the forefront of, addressing some of these societal issues, as well as advocating for our people. That there's so much more we can share, but one other thing is we were noticing, people who may have different barriers accessing vaccines or testings because of language or culture, and because addressing barriers is so ingrained in our mission. We decided to go out, bring services out to the community, partner with organizations and groups and, places of worship, community centers, where maybe they, if they can't access the vaccine, we bring vaccines to them. Even if it's, in the beginning, maybe the numbers were small, even if it's 10, even if it's 50, we go there. At some point it got really, much larger numbers, but we know that community members need to work with trusted partners like us, right? And we can be that bridge, but we have to go out of our walls, right? To meet them where they're at and bring them the care. And so I think that is sort of what we will continue to do and stay with us even beyond the pandemic. Who else out there are not getting the healthcare that they need or not getting access to whatever services? How can we break down those barriers? So anyway.
I love that. That's so good. That whole notion, even just of like, where are the needs and how can we take the resources to them and go to them? I love that because it resonates a lot of even what we talk about as a church and a congregation, right? This notion of like, what, and partly why we even have things like Love Your Neighbor Sunday, right? A day like today where we don't have a church service, really the impetus and the conviction is, what does it look like for us, not just to go to church, but to take church to people? And part of that means like just loving people in very real and tangible ways and providing practical needs. And so I just love kind of that piece too, that it reminds me a lot of kind of even just the conversations that we're having as a faith community, within our own kind of context. So speaking of kind of this notion of like you had mentioned, and I know you've said this, doing some research, I saw some of the interviews that you had done, and I think you did one with the International Examiner or Northwest Asian Weekly. But you had this line, and you just alluded to it actually just now. This notion that you're more than just a healthcare provider. And I wrote this down because I didn't want to butcher it, but I think you said something to the effect of that your organization is so much more than just a healthcare provider. It's a movement towards a more just and equitable society where everyone thrives, which is then why, your conviction was that everyone should really support this organization and be a part of this movement because our communities depend on it, our families depend on it, and we depend on it. And just that statement right there, like I think resonated with me on so many different levels, right? One, even our like why we call ourselves Common Good Church, right? And we say this every Sunday, like we don't exist just for ourselves, but we exist for the common good, for the benefit and the flourishing of all people and all persons, right? No matter their race, their ethnicity, their age, their gender, their sexual orientation, social economic status. I love like what you're talking about, because in some ways, like, I think that's very reflective of like, it parallels kind of even just our conviction of what it means to be a Jesus community, right? That really cares about all people and all persons. We're right now in a collection of talks on building the beloved community. And a lot of what we've been talking about is this notion, this vision of the beloved community, that both we find in scripture, but that also we see individuals like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. really kind of advocating for, right? And Dr. King talked about kind of this global vision of the beloved community in which all people can share in the wealth of the earth, right? And where there would be no poverty and no hunger and no homelessness, and right, where there be no more racial discrimination and bigotry, all these things, right? Like it's such a beautiful picture. And so I'd love for you to, and also knowing that you're a person of faith as well, right? That shares, these similar convictions. Talk a little bit more about like, perhaps both from the lens of like how ICHS really sees themselves as this movement towards a more just, equitable society. But that even in your own kind of personal life, like I'd imagine that also informs why you are giving your life to the work that you're doing. So I know that was like a weird question. Take it however you want to take that. But yeah, what does that kind of look like for you individually, for your organization to really be about and trying to build kind of this beloved community in many ways? Like the beloved community doesn't just exist within the church, right? I think in many ways you're also building that as well.
Yeah. There was like 20 questions in there.
I know. Sorry, I'm such a bad interviewer.
I guess I'll start maybe from myself, because
yeah,
so much of what we do is from what we believe and what we value.
Mm-hmm.
So as a person of faith, I've always been drawn to, seeing the needs of people around me, or seeing, the distressed or the marginalized, or, the vulnerable. Growing up, I don't know why, but the ones that are going through issues always kind of attracted me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, not in a bad way, but I don't know. I guess I have a tendency to be drawn to those things and those people, and really wanting to do something to help make their lives better, or just be there for them. And I think growing up, even though I did my degree in business. I did everything I needed to like satisfy my family's expectations. And it was always, what can I do with the gifts and talents that I'm given to make a difference, right? And for me, that was being in the nonprofit sector. It's figuring out who I am and where I can make a big difference. And so that sort of got me into, I'm not a nurse, I'm not a doctor, but I could bring people together. I can bring resources together. I can, once I know what the needs are, I can connect them with people with resources and actually match make, and then, create a win-win situation. So that's kind of how I got into fundraising work for elder care organization, Canon. And then during COVID, or even leading up to COVID, I felt like, there's so many more needs out there. And healthcare is such a basic, fundamental thing that everyone should have access to. And if, how can I use my experience to actually contribute to accessible, equitable healthcare? And so when I got a chance to be part of ICHS, as daunting as it sounds and felt, I decided, this is where I think God is leading me to. So, during COVID, I think it's even more evident that when, it doesn't matter if you're healthy and safe. If the person next to you is not, you're at risk as well. So until we are all healthy and safe and have what we need to thrive, we're not there. And so what can we do to make that happen, right? And for me, it's my role is through philanthropy and through bringing resources together. Another person might be to treat the illnesses. Another person might be to help people sign up for insurance so that they can access the services. So it's really just finding my role and contributing a little bit into this bigger thing that is happening. And I found that here at ICHS, and I really resonate with their mission and vision of not just helping people, thriving communities, but a just society, and actually being part of the conversation to change some of those policies and make sure policies are not disproportionately affecting certain members of community, right? And doing both. Like, you can't just advocate and not actually help people, but you can't just treat the symptoms and not go to the root of the problem. So, when we have an organization that, equally values the advocacy work as is the actual, direct care, that's where I felt like I found my place. Can I answer at least half of your question?
That's so good. That was fantastic. That last piece that you just stated, right? Like, part of what drew you to ICHS, right, is they're doing kind of this both and work, right? The advocacy work, but then also like addressing the real tangible needs that are right there. And I think oftentimes it's easy to kind of fall into the trap of like, it's just one or the other. Really passionate just about your advocacy work, but you're not actually like caring for the tangible felt needs that are right there, and then vice versa, right? And I think just, to pick on church a little bit, or Christians, sometimes I felt like in my experience, like in church, we definitely will do like let's care about the needs that are right in front of us, and so we'll make the sandwiches and go feed the homeless, right? But we're not necessarily like thinking about the systems and the structures that are actually causing people to be on the streets in the first place. And so I love the fact that you kind of named that, right? Like, as an organization, you're identifying both. What, kind of put you on the spot a little bit, but like, when you think about the church, even what do you think the church can do better in terms of like, when we think about, wanting to be a part of creating more just, equitable societies? Like, what do you think the church can do to do a little bit better of like doing both of those things? And how do you kind of hold those two things kind of in tension?
Yeah. I think collaboration is huge. I think as the nonprofit sector are so entrenched in the direct care and meeting the needs and just
Yeah.
day in, day out, sometimes it's hard for us to really see beyond, like, what else are there? Like,
Yeah.
what are the needs, and how are people living? And so I think the church community can really come alongside and help, maybe guide us and share with us, like, this is what we're seeing, this is what our members are experiencing. How can we partner, right?
Yeah.
And this is same with our funders, our government partners. There's a movement also in fundraising of not just putting the donor in the pedestal, but actually leveling the playing field and treating everyone as equal partners, right? Not just the people with money, but also the people doing the work, people in the community receiving the care, who are the eyes and ears for us to tell us, are we doing a good job? Are we really meeting the needs? So I think partnership, collaboration, obviously financial help is good, nonprofits depend on that. But I think more so just, coming alongside nonprofits and direct care providers to make a difference together. That might be, just a short answer.
No, that's great.
And I think as a church, if there are certain issues or group of community members that really speak to your heart, I think it would be great to kind of come together and think about what are some tangible ways we can serve them, right? But then also being informed about what are some policies and systemic things that are putting people in those situations. How can we speak up for them, with them? How can we participate in these conversations that addresses the root cause of some of these issues? I think sometimes maybe the church community, I don't know, I sense sometimes we're timid in making a stance because, that's too political, right? But, if our faith doesn't change how, what we do, what we say, how we behave, how we advocate for another person, then what good is it to believe? Like, why do we believe in?
Absolutely.
It feel better? So I think we're in this time of our society where going to church on Sunday is not enough, right? I think how we live outside of the church walls, that's really our testimony.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that because I'm there already. I am I am, in it at the same time. And
we're all on the journey. Absolutely.
Right? So
that's so good. Well, and then just to add that layer around like cultural and ethnic identity too, right? Like, we're in AAPI Heritage Month. And when I think about the church, and then in particular, like the Asian American church, right? Like, I think even more so, I think, again, not to make generalizations, but if we're going to generalize certain things, right? Like, I think, I don't want to say historically, because I know this isn't true, right? There have been incredible, like, activists that have come out of the Asian American kind of communities. But I think, there's that very much that notion of that stereotype of like Asian Americans are very quiet. They don't want to rock the boat, model minority, like, let's just not cause trouble. Right. And so when you layer like trying to be the church that doesn't want to like take stances, and then on top of that, like you're predominantly Asian American church, right? Or you're an Asian American Christian, like, then I think even the challenges of like speaking out and advocating or like saying certain things like become even more challenging, right? And but I think to your point, like, I think especially for those of us who identify as Asian American, like, I think that pandemic one has revealed a lot of things that perhaps we've kind of swept under the rug. And I think especially a lot of younger folks are saying, hey, like, perhaps my generations, before me, like, have not spoken out, but like, I think people are saying no, like, both my faith calls for it, but also just my own lived experience as an Asian American who is now experiencing the things that I've experienced over the past couple of years, right? And So I
Yeah.
think it does feel like the tide is kind of shifting or
Yeah.
changing a little bit.
And I
Yeah,
know that it could sound very heavy and daunting,
yeah,
but I think this is sort of also exciting and an opportunity, right? Just, you know, in this current time, we're living through history where we're transitioning from some of the older ways, right? Our
yeah,
parents who are immigrants may have a different way of thinking, and maybe they keep quiet because they work so hard to get to this country and they don't want to jinx anything. They just want to live peacefully and happily and give opportunities to the next generation.
yeah.
So they have their own struggles. But now, like for people who understand both sides,
Hmm.
right? I think we have a unique opportunity to make some real changes and to have some conversation. They don't have to be confrontational, right? But because you have understanding of where your parents came from and you have understanding what it could be, right?
Yeah.
You have a unique position to bring them together, right? And
Wow.
to advocate for people that, they don't like internalize racism. Like they don't even realize that some of the thinking is
Right.
racist, and we do it to our own people. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there are so many opportunities because we understand them, they trust it. There's that trust base, right? And
Mm.
so we can gently, compassionately share with them, this term is not okay
Right.
anymore,
Yeah.
or this way of thinking is not okay anymore.
Yeah.
Um, we ought to think about, more than just ourselves because
Yeah.
we're all connected in some way.
Yeah.
So I think about that both in the racial conversation, but also the age conversation.
Yeah.
You know, as a Gen X,
Yeah. Yeah.
we often are caught in between, right? The older generation and then people behind us. But we
Yeah.
have understanding. We live through the analog, but we're also in digital.
Right.
That we have a unique position to bring the two together and to
Yeah.
create peace, right? And make things more equitable. So whatever that is, I think, in our faith, because we have understanding, that gives you extra power
Yeah.
to extra understand, extra eyes to
Yeah.
share with people that are different.
Yeah, that's so good. Hey, I know we're running out of time. There's so many other things I want to talk to you about. You touched on it really quickly. If you could just expand on it for just a little bit. Um, the racial conversation, right? And the dynamics of like, we're all interconnected, right? So, you're doing work of advocating for the AAPI community, but at the same time, like we realize like what we're experiencing, like it's not just it's not just the AAPI community, right? I'm even just thinking in terms of just recent events, what just happened in Buffalo, New York, right? Again, we're seeing the white supremacy and the racism and the ways in which like people are being emboldened. Uh, Given the fact that you were in the international district, right, during the pandemic, and then of course everything that kind of happened with George Floyd, right, all the protests that were taking place. I know like the ID became then very like there were just other challenges that kind of came about in the ID, right, and then there's also just I think what like white supremacy has done is it's pitted communities of colors against each other, right? So even within the AAPI community, we're trying to advocate for ourselves, but then at the same time, there's anti-blackness that exists within the AAPI community. Like maybe talk a little about just some of the dynamics of like you were in it, being in the international district as a neighbor's restaurant is being broken into. Like, what was that like for you personally, for your organization? And like, how have you kind of navigated, some of those challenges, and even for ICHS, like how have you kind of been navigating these very challenging times that we find ourselves in?
Oh, yeah. Gosh, it feels so far, but it was just like, yet so close.
Right.
um, yeah, I think it was just so many layers of just, one thing after another.
Yeah.
Um, Let me think about which angle to approach this. Definitely there were, safety concerns when, there was all these break-ins and people just there are people that in our communities that are, especially API community, my own parents didn't quite understand, you know, why people are protesting, and, you know, they're just looters, and they're, but then there's, you know, so there's a lot of education we had to do, you know, just in our own community. But yeah, I guess, you know, it was just really sad time. It was a sad time because people weren't coming to the ID. It was just kind of a ghost town. Businesses lost, you know, a lot of customers, and you know, the clinic had to force, you know, we were forced to close as well. And so, you know, how do we keep up with the, you know, the patients? And so that was a really difficult time as we're also navigating anti-Asian hate, you know, on top of the health, you know, stuff that was going on. I think, you know, we sort of had to pick our battles, and you know, every battle is important, but I think first we partnered up with, you know, like I shared earlier, organizations to make sure our elders that are, you know, isolated have what they need, and we partner with our other organizations to bring meals to them. So, and then there was the healthcare, like how do we make sure healthcare is still accessible? You know, every opportunity we can reopen, we can bring people in, we did that. But then on the racial tension side, you know, I think it's really banding together with other organizations. How can we address this together, show solidarity together? We were parts of members of ICTRIS serve on the or joined the anti-racist coalition that was headed up by CISC. And so we did come together and think about, you know, what do we need to do? You know, is it messaging? Is it education? Is it just, you know, increasing security and make sure people feel safe? So there's, I mean, just building coalition and banding together and showing solidarity. That was important in the early days and even now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a really challenging time just because of who we are, what we do, and just the location that we're in.
Yeah.
But, you know, in a way, it also helped elevate problems that had always been there, right? You know, we talked to some of our elders and mentors, you know, they're like, you know, this is not new.
Right.
We experienced it when we were, you know, in our days, and you know, it just got heightened. And now the difference is there's no ignoring it anymore, right? And people are much aware and are willing to talk about it even today. Like, I mean, but you know, in fact, some of the same issues, you know, it just manifested in different ways. So the fight isn't done, right? We still have to advocate and make sure, you know, people understand each other, and the more understanding you have, the less you will put assumptions on each other, and which end up in, you know, in horrendous acts of violence. So I guess I will just end with maybe something that, you know, the foundation is thinking. Next year, maybe, you know, a lot of times we do things like fundraising campaigns, you know, for ourselves. But, you know, what if there was an effort where all API organizations come together and fundraise together, bring resources together and share them throughout, right? And make fundraising even more equitable. So maybe there are ways in people's lives to kind of think about what are some smaller things that you can do to make it more equitable, and more, you know, spread the wealth a little bit, figuratively and literally. So that's something the foundation's thinking in continue to build solidarity in really tangible ways. I
love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, I know we've got to wrap this up. I again, so appreciate your time. Thank you for everything that you shared, and just even your own personal journey and the ways in which your own experience have shaped really the work that you're doing today. And I hope that's an encouragement for those that are listening in and watching this. Right? That again, I think the goal of these conversations is, let's highlight the work, the incredible work that ICHS is doing and Heidi's doing. But I think for all of us is to kind of take this to heart and ask the question, what does this mean for me, right? Like we all have a role to play. We're all interconnected. There's opportunities for us to, I think sometimes, like you mentioned earlier, like we always see what we can't do, right? Like we see the needs in healthcare, but I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse. I didn't go to school for it, but you're like, well, I went to business. Like I was in B school. Like I know how to raise money. I know how to market. I know how to fundraise, right? And you found your niche. And so I think that's awesome. That's incredible. And I hope that's an encouragement and an inspiration to all of us listening of like, no, God has put something in us. God has deposited something in us. How do we just discover that and then put that to work in a way that's actually for the benefit and for the flourishing and the thriving of all people? And all persons. So Heidi, thank you again so much for your time. So grateful. And to everyone that tuned in, I hope again that you were encouraged, inspired, even challenged. And so until next time, take care, stay safe, and God bless.